This is Mike.
And Beck.
Nina.
And this is Brew Crime. All right, this episode is going to be a little bit different. Instead of 3 different stories on one theme, these are all basically one story on the theme of the St. Valentine's Massacre. Mm-hmm. So we're going to start out with Nina, and she's going to cover like the one gang. I'm going to cover the other gang, and then Beck's going to finish it off with the massacre at the end.
Yep.
All right, Nina, why don't you give us a little hint of what's to come?
Absolutely. So as Mike said, I'm going to talk about Alfonso Gabriel Capone. So Al Capone. I'm going to focus mostly on who and what he is and how he became what he was. Mm-hmm. And then we'll go from there. So the beer I chose to match with the topic was simply based on the name. And it's the Arrogant Bastard Ale. I'm reading right off their website to just give you guys a little blurb and feeling of what it's all about. Their social is #ArrogantBastard. So I highly suggest you look that up. One of the slogans they have on here as well is called "You're Not Worthy." So look it up. Description of the beer goes as, this is an aggressive beer. You probably won't like it. It's quite doubtful that you have the taste or sophistication to be able to appreciate an ale of this quality in depth.
It's so douchey.
#ArrogantBastard. We would suggest that you stick to safer and more familiar territory. Maybe something with a multi-million-dollar ad campaign aimed at convincing you it's made in a little brewery. Or one that implies that their tasteless fizzy yellow beer will give you more sex appeal. Perhaps you have the... I think beer is really sexy, especially I think that's a huge beer guy. I'm like, fuck yeah, I'm going to fuck that guy. Going back to the website, that was a personal take on that. Perhaps you think multi-million-dollar ad campaigns make a beer taste better. Perhaps you're mouthing your words as you're reading this. We believe that pondering to the lowest common denominator represents the height of tyranny, a virtual form of keeping the consumer barefoot and stupid. Brought forth upon an unsuspecting public in 1997, Arrogant Bastard Ale openly challenges the tyrannical overlords who are brazenly attempting to keep Americans changed in the shackless and poor taste. Since the very beginning, Arrogant Bastard Ale has revealed it is unprecedented and uncompromising celebration of intensity. There have been many nods to Arrogant Bastard Ale, even outright attempt to copy it, but only one can ever embody the true nature of liquid arrogance.
So Arrogant Bastard is actually brewed by Stone Brewing. They've kind of separated the brands now. And I actually just met the former head brewer, Mitch Steele, when I was in Atlanta. He now owns New Realm Brewing. And I actually gave him the double barrel version of the beer we had, the Death Blow, in last episode. So this is a really, really big beer. Let's pour a little more than Nina poured for me. This is a deep, like reddish. What would you say that is? What color is that? I'm not very good with colors. Reddy brown, like chestnutty maybe?
Rust, yeah. Chestnut's good.
Kind of a is it tan head? What is that?
Like a runny poop color. Because I don't have as much in there. It's chestnutty brown.
It's got quite the floral hop note. There's maybe a grapefruit hint. No real grapefruit, but grapefruit hint.
Thank goodness.
Caramel, toffee. You know, the aroma is not that arrogant. The aroma you could smell and go, no, this isn't going to be too much. But when you taste it, it is.
I like it, though. I don't mind it as much.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Because, yeah, there's definitely, like, there's the hot bitters up front. There's, like, some pine and resin. There's some grapefruit pith and grapefruit and, like, citrus notes in there. It's definitely bitter. It's got that punch.
The taste lingers as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it lingers on, like, the back of your tongue. This is a beer that when they released it, what did you say it was again? Like 1997?
Yep.
Would have been so out of the ordinary that most people would open it and go, what the fuck is wrong with this beer? But now it's kind of
run of the mill.
Run of the mill. It's not as bitter as a lot of IPAs. It's not as this. It's not as this. It's quite tasty though, at least in my opinion. It's 7.2% alcohol. I don't know if you said that. I can definitely drink this beer myself. I guess I'm worthy.
Badumtus.
Exactly. All right, so let's get on to the story about our arrogant friend here.
So I'm going to start off talking, of course, about Al Capone. Al Capone's full name is Alphonse Gabriel Capone, born on January 17th, 1899, and died on January 25th, 1947. Al Capone was born in Brooklyn, New York, the son of recent Italian immigrants, Gabrielle and Teresin Capone. Capone's father was a barber and his mother was a seamstress. When Capone was 19, he married May Collin. They had one son, Albert Sonny Francis. Capone's former boss and friend, Johnny Torrio, who was an Italian-born American mobster who helped to build a criminal organization, the Chicago Outfit, in the 1920s, was the boy's godfather. Capone wanted to do right by his family, so he moved to Baltimore, where he took a job as a bookkeeper for a construction company. But when Capone's father died of a heart attack in 1920, Torrio invited him to come to Chicago. Capone, of course, jumped at the opportunity. In 1970, Torrio introduced Capone to the gangster Frankie Yale, who employed Capone as a bartender and bouncer at the Harvard Inn in Coney Island. It was there that Capone earned his nickname Scarface. One night, he made an indecent remark to a woman at the bar. Her brother punched Capone, then slashed him across the face, leaving 3 scars that inspired his enduring nickname. I'll have a couple pictures posted. I found it rather difficult to find pictures of the 3 scars because he, after the incident, preferred to only be photographed on his right side. And these pictures show his left side of his face where you can see the 3 marks labeled. Torrio was running a number of gambling operations near Capone's home when Capone began running small errands for him. Although Torrio left Brooklyn for Chicago in 1909, the two remained very close. After an attempt at Torrio's life in 1925 by rival mobsters, Torrio decided to leave the business and return to Italy, turning over the entire operation to Capone. Scarface ignored his mentor's advice to maintain a low profile and instead moved his headquarters to a plush suite in the Metropolitan Hotel in downtown Chicago. From there, he began living a luxurious and public lifestyle, spending money lavishly, although always in cash to avoid a trail. Newspapers of the time estimated Capone's operations generated $100 million in revenue annually, which is around $1.3 billion today with inflation.
Wow.
He made a couple of bucks, right?
Yeah, no doubt.
During the height of Prohibition, Capone's multi-million-dollar Chicago operation in bootlegging, prostitution, and gambling dominated the organized crime scene. For those who aren't too familiar with Prohibition, it referred to an era between October 28, 1990, where Congress possessed the Volstead Act, which was the popular name for the National Prohibition Act. The act established the legal definition of intoxicating liquors as well as penalties for producing them. Capone was responsible for many brutal attacks of violence, mainly against other gangsters. When 2 of Capone's sworn enemies were spotted in Cicero, Capone ordered his men to gun them down. Unbeknownst to Capone, William McSwagan, which is a super fucking gangster name if you ask me,
Yeah.
known as the Hanging Prosecutor, which is even fucking more dope than his real
I
name,
love that name. That's awesome.
who had tried to prosecute Capone before for a previous murder, was with the other 2 marked men, and all 3 happened to be killed. The most famous, however, was the St. Valentine's Day Massacre in 1929, in which he ordered the assassination of 7 rifles. Many say that this was Capone's downfall. Fed up with Chicago's gang-dominated lavishnesses, the public clamored for justice. The police had no evidence for any of these murders, so instead they raided Capone's businesses where they gathered documentation that will later be used to bolster charges against him for income tax evasion, which is super not as gangster as anything else he did.
Yeah.
Capone was never indicted for his racketeering, but was finally brought to justice in 1931. After serving 6.5 years, Capone was released. He died in 1947 in Miami. He suffered a cardiac arrest on January 22nd, and on January 25th, he died in his home, surrounded by his family. Capone's life captured the public imagination, and his gangster persona has been immortalized in the many movies and books inspired by his exploits. Of course, I can't talk about Al Capone without mentioning Scarface and the incredible portrayal by Al Pacino. Tony Montana, who of course was portrayed by Al Pacino, was based on the real-life mobster Capone. Scarface is loosely based on a 1932 film of the same name, in which the main character, Tony Camont, is inspired by infamous mafioso Al Capone on one of his most notorious crime lords in mob history.
Awesome. Yeah, he's always been a really interesting mobster for sure.
I mean, he did the damn thing, right? Like, as we talk about, when you think of a mobster, you think of Capone, you think of Scarface, you think of that whole...
Yeah, he's the one you think of.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's either that or it's the Irish mobs too, right? So it was the Italian mob and the Irish mob in Chicago and in Boston and all those friggin' towns.
Yeah.
The whole Peaky Blinders. and that mob is super sick. But yeah, I was really inspired reading about everything about Al Capone because I knew of Scarface, but not as much about who and what he was. And one of the contradictions I found is that in Scarface, they talk about, obviously, everyone remembers a big cocaine scene and the horse head in the bed.
Yeah.
That definitely fiction, not thing.
Yeah. It probably happened somewhere else in some other gang war. Just didn't happen in that one.
Right. Yeah. But of course, with anything, they try to glamorize it and add all the super cool, cool shit. I shouldn't say cool shit, but all the super cool shit into one to just make it that extra right? So yeah,
definitely. Well, yeah, no, I'm a big fan of researching the mob in general, and Capone's a really cool story. I mean, fuck, I'm glad I didn't grow up in that era, because I do not want to grow up in a town with. It is really run by the mobsters. It wasn't run by the police. It wasn't run by the politicians, which you'll hear a little more in mine even. It was just
mayhem.
Mayhem, yeah, totally mayhem. I'm glad we live here now. You know, there's still gangs here, there's still organized crime, but government runs, and then they're below. And
yeah.
It's nice to have that.
Not so like about everything with Al Capone and who he was and how he was. I mean, when I was writing up my story, I was just like, he died with a fucking heart attack. Like, what a shitty way to go. It's like this gangster. I was thinking like guns blazing, this person, that person, all that. No, heart attack at home, surrounded by his family. I'm like, oh, you fucking bastard.
Yeah, well, don't worry, because when you get into my story, 2 of the gang leaders that I talk about that died, it's just like, really? You died that way?
But even that,
yeah,
I mean,
at least he died that way and not because of syphilis, which is ravaging his body.
Well,
probably.
But even that, I mean, Al Capone did all these things. We all know him as this like crazy gangster, but he went to jail for tax evasion.
Yeah,
it's like the Martha Stewart crime of gangsters. Like, the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah,
tax evasion.
Oh no, wait. She went to jail for
insider trading.
Insider trading, yeah.
But I mean, like, it's
same difference.
Same, same, right?
I do love the fact that she runs a TV show now with Snoop Dogg.
Yeah,
and she's the one who's gone to
their
jail.
best friends. Yeah.
Although he did get off on a murder charge, so he's not perfect.
Innocent until proven guilty, right? Like we've talked about this, right? It is what it is, and that's where we got to leave it at. She's a convicted felon, and Snoop Dogg isn't. So.
Yeah, that's true. So, although he got off on technicality, but whatever. He might have cleaned his life up, but he was a gangbanger back in the day. He is a cool guy now. I love the fact that him and Martha Stewart are like really good friends and everything. But
a cooking show, cooking with Snoop and Martha, whatever the fuck it's called. I don't know. But I haven't
watched it, but I do love seeing the commercials for it because it's so hilarious.
Yeah.
Seeing the 2 of them together, and they're obviously good friends. And I've seen some behind the scenes stuff, and they are.
Yeah.
But it's so fucking weird.
It's weird, and I mean, going back to this, I mean, I'm sure Capone did so much. I mean, it's awful, but cool fucking shit.
Oh yeah.
And tax evasion, you die from a heart attack, like fuck.
Yeah.
There's been so many more cooler ways to do the deed and do the time, but whatever. And there was nothing exciting about him when he was serving his time in jail too, because I thought he'd be leading his gang from jail and all that, but he didn't do anything. He just did his time, clean, got out. And fuck, a heart attack?
Yeah. You got to remember, too, though, that back then it was harder to run a gang from a jail, whereas now you can, like, sneak in a cell phone or buy a cell phone through someone and then run your gang through that cell phone, right? Or email or whatever. Back then it was like you had to find a way to get the information out.
But even Pablo Escobar, he built his own fucking jail and had his people running it.
Yeah, that's different, though. That's because he was so fucking rich that he could buy every police officer. I'll go to jail, but I'm going to build it first.
Yeah.
But Al Capone, I mean, how many millions? Would be 1.5 billion after inflation?
Yeah.
He made a couple pennies here and there. Yeah.
I think there's a difference between South America and their drug trade and there is in the U.S.
Yeah. Absolutely.
What happened with Pablo would not happen in the U.S., I don't think.
I agree.
I mean, it could get close maybe, but not to the same extent. But that's a really interesting story too. Like watching, I haven't finished it yet, but watching the the Narcos show, just seeing what happened is insane. I haven't finished Narcos, but I have watched the Inside the Real Narcos, I think it's called, which was a special forces British military guy that went in to South America. There was only 3 episodes, I think it was. And he actually got access to the real narcos. He went into the gangs.
Did he walk with one of them, like in like a backyard of like a house? And there's, I might be remembering wrong, but
there was some of that
around the gangsters, and he's just like, I don't know that we should be here recording right now.
Yeah, there was some of that, but there was meeting them in the middle of nowhere where they were going to do a drug swap with the military helicopters flying over, and they're hiding. Like it was amazing, so sketchy. Yeah. But this guy had spent his whole career in the British military cracking down on the drug trade in the Middle East, and then was going down to film with the real narcos in South America. It was insane. It's a really cool show if you haven't seen it.
Yeah, we'll definitely have to put a link up on that so that people can see that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to talk about the other side of the St. Valentine's Massacre, the North Side Gang. To pair with the North Side Gang, I'm going to use the Boombox Brewing Midnight Train. The milk chocolate coconut stout comes in at 8.8% alcohol. Another light beer for our recording session here. And there's a lot of running alcohol across borders here, and I thought, what better way to do that than via train? So this beer is another super black, opaque beer with a nice small brown head. It smells like roasted malts. It's got some coconut there and a little bit of like the lactose milkiness. Very mildly sweet, but not a huge aroma for the style. But the flavor is massive. Lots of lactose, like lots of creaminess, lots of vanilla, lots of roasted malts, chocolate. The bitterness is low. You're not getting a lot of alcohol in the flavor. Maybe that's just how much we've drank tonight.
I actually don't mind it, and that's coming from like a super basic palate. Yeah, I like the vanilla flavor in it.
Yeah.
You can definitely sense it. I don't know about the chocolate though. I can obviously see on the can it says chocolate, but I'm maybe not advanced enough to taste that yet. But
okay. All right. The Northside Gang, also known as the Northside Mob, can find its beginnings in 1919 on the north side of Chicago. The north side of Chicago, Illinois, is a region of the city near the downtown core. There seems to be a differing opinion of what makes up the north side of Chicago, and this guy, me, who has never been to Chicago, cannot make heads or tails of exactly what is meant by the north side. The best I can tell is the gang managed the north side and the near north side areas of Chicago. But fuck, Chicago has a lot of neighborhoods.
yeah, I've been to Chicago actually
Oh, really? Nice.
during Christmas time, and they got snow for real.
Oh, I bet they do, yeah.
It was like I think I was 13, and it was like up to my chest.
Why would you go to a place like that in the
In the
wintertime?
wintertime,
Yeah.
yeah.
We had family that actually lived there, so we went there for Christmas and New Year's. Fun fact, we spent New Year's in the hospital because my cousin closed the door in her hand and actually broke all 4 of her fingers in her hand. And they didn't have insurance, but we were sitting in the ER room because, I mean, they were like not facing the right way. So it was like you had to go to the hospital, not like you couldn't go because you don't have insurance.
Yeah.
It was a thing. But
Also,
anyways,
fuck you, U.S., for not having basic medical insurance so
Yeah.
you can go to the hospital and not go bankrupt.
Yeah.
especially as a child who is an idiot. Yeah, I mean, sorry if you heard that, but you're an idiot.
The Northside Gang was dominated by Irish Americans, but also had a large Polish American membership. The gang also had people of German and Italian descent to round it out. This gang rocketed to success in the Prohibition era, like so many other gangs of the time. Nothing drives organized crime like a good prohibition, after all.
Yeah.
I mean, just look at pot.
Yeah.
Up until recently, look at how many friggin' Hells Angels and stuff profited off of pot. It does a great job. Much like many gangs in Chicago, the Northside Gang can trace its history back to the Market Street Gang. One of the many gangs of the early 20th century, these guys started out as pickpockets, sneak thieves, and labor sluggers. They worked out of the 42nd and 43rd wards of Chicago, happening to be located on the north side and the near north side. Now, everyone knows what a pickpocket is, but I sure did not know what a sneak thief or a labor slugger was. So here's a little lesson on both. A sneak thief, out of all the thieves out there, may be one of the less shitty, as they are people who commit a theft in a sneaky way only. They do not use violence.
So like a pickpocketer.
Yeah.
No, but
Where
like
I stand behind you in line in a sneaky way.
they'll break into your house when they know you're not there. You know, they're not going to beat the shit out of you. They're not going to kill you. It's still shitty, but it's
okay.
It's not as shitty as someone who breaks into your place knowing you're there and kills you because of it.
What if they didn't? What if they thought you weren't home, but you were home?
They're not a sneak thief anymore.
And they're a fucking
Failure.
asshole.
Exactly.
What an arrogant asshole thinking you're not home.
Exactly. Now, when it comes to labor sluggers, we're all going to get into a little more violence for sure. The early 1900s saw the rise of labor unions in the United States as part of the industrialization of the country. Now, poor citizens loved the newfound unions as they fought for the rights of the employee, but they've had a long connection to organized crime, and this story will not stray from that. Companies would hire street gangs to be strike busters, and try to break up the union activity as they grew. But of course, not to be left out, unions would pay off gangs of their own. These union-owned gangs would be called labor sluggers, and they would serve to protect the people from strike busters. They would also be used to get new union members, and they would not be shy about using force to bring in those new union members. It's not hard to understand that gangs that had large immigrant membership would side with unions that would strive to help their own people. The Market Street Gang really made a name for themselves during the circulation wars of the early 1910s that were waged between the Chicago Examiner and the Chicago Tribune. Yes, you heard that right. Newspapers waged an actual war for readers with actual death tolls. Yes, fucking Chicago. The gangs brought its slugging ways to the war for newspaper readers happily. What did they do, you asked? They would go to the newsstands that did not carry the papers in question and make it known they should carry the papers through violence.
Were they going postal at these stands? Better carry my fucking shit, bro.
They go in papery? I don't know.
That was weak.
Now, why does it matter what the Market Street Gang did, you ask, once again? It was during this circulation war that the first leader of the Northside Gang would develop all of the contacts that would propel him to power. Dean O'Banion was a member of the Juvenile Street Little Hellions, and it was here as a member gang of the Market Street Gang that he made the contacts with politicians and journalists. O'Banion was mentored by the safecracker Charlie the Ox Razor, a member of the Market Street Gang. So let's move into the first leader of the Northside Gang. Let's get into some background on Dean O'Banion. Charles Dean O'Banion was born on July 8th, 1892. Hard to believe, isn't it? Although he was better known as Dean or Dion O'Banion. Big surprise, this Irish kid was born to Irish Catholic parents. He was born in a small town in central Illinois named Maroa. When he was a small child, the family packed up and moved to Aurora, Illinois. Unfortunately for his family, his mother died in 1901, and this precipitated the move to Chicago. His father brought him and his older brother, but for some reason left his sister Ruth back in Maroa. The family made their home in the neighborhood of Kilgubbin, I think that's how you pronounce it, an original settlement near Goose Island, which, if you know Chicago at all, you'll know Goose Island Brewing. This area was also known as Little Hell, and was an area that was populated heavily with Irish Americans on the north side of Chicago that was notorious across Chicago for a high crime rate. Deanie, as he was known when he was young, sang in the church choir at Holy Name Cathedral, but music and religion were never really near his heart. His real passion was the street life of Kilgubbin area. He got the nickname of Gimpy early on as his left leg was shorter due to a streetcar incident as a child. Now, almost no one would have the nerve to actually call him this. This makes me think that he was probably a pretty tough kid through and through. Now, as kids, O'Banion and his friends Earl Jaime Weiss, Vincent the Schemer Drucci, and George Bugs Morgan joined the Market Street Gang. Remember these names as they will feature prominently in this story. They were known for their theft, robbery, and their ties to the Chicago black market as kids. Remember I mentioned the circulation wars?
Yes.
The gang with these kids originally started slugging for the Chicago Tribune. But you can never trust gangsters as they switch sides to the Chicago Examiner after meeting with newspaper boss Moses Annenberg and received a better offer. That name is spelled Annenberg. Annenberg? I don't know. It was through Annenberg that O'Banion met Charlie the Ox Razor, though, and where he would learn his trade. In 1909, he was arrested for safecracking and assault at the young age of 17. Already a piece of shit at 17 is pretty impressive. O'Banion would find himself working as a waiter at McGovern's Liberty Inn, would regale the patrons with his wonderful Irish tenor voice.
It does not sound sexy at all.
Now, this was only so that his buddies could pickpocket around the club in the coat rooms. He would also drug the patrons' drinks so that they could rob them at the end of the night.
Nice.
Classy, right? These drinks earned the term slippery as a Mickey Finn.
It's a slippery slope.
Yeah, exactly. With the gang, they would also use violence in Wards 42 and 43 to help steer outcomes of elections. Because, of course, right?
Al Capone had done the same, so it's just like intimidation to
Oh,
vote
yeah.
for whoever, yep.
Oh, yeah, violence all the way.
Which obviously these days never ever happens at all, and everyone has full confidence in voting whoever they want with no intimidation.
Especially in the U.S., right?
Yeah.
Hell
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
America.
Totally.
Totally fair, Simpson.
America,
Fuck yeah.
To the horror of some and to the celebration of others, 1920 brought upon prohibition in the United States. This only meant a new business opportunity for shitheads, though. Now, in 1920, the O'Banion mob, already known as the Northside Gang, started a bootlegging operation as well as taking over existing breweries and distilleries in the north side of Chicago. He arranged for beer supplies in Canada to start shipping beer south of the border immediately. Hence, this beer. Because, I mean, the beer's probably coming on the train, right? Just a fun historical fact, Canada had a short prohibition from 1918 to 1920, but it was only a temporary wartime measure and not the big Puritan movement in the United States. Now, there were longer stretches in some provinces. A fun fact, though, is that even though it was illegal in Canada to purchase alcohol, it was never illegal to produce in many provinces. And as such, there was a ton of alcohol to export. What better place to sell it than the United States?
America.
Soon after his beer deals, he struck up deals with whiskey and gin distributors. Because why not, right? With local and Canadian alcohol, they already had a near monopoly on the local supply of real beer and high-quality spirits, while the rivals only had supplies of garbage, rot-gut liquor, and low-quality moonshine. With the rise in power, gangsters were drawn to the gang and its ranks swelled. At the height of O'Banion's power, it claimed that they were making $1 million a year on just alcohol. According to an inflation calculator, that would be $12.5 million a year as of 2017, and it does not include their other criminal activities and racketeering. How amazing is that? Like $12.5 million a year just on booze.
Incredible.
Yeah. That's
And
pretty
it's obviously
amazing.
not taxable or anything because it's illegal, right?
Exactly.
I mean,
So
not
it's-
that we're talking taxes.
It's all
but-
cash.
Yeah.
But what successful gang can make it only on bootlegging? They also continued to burglarize local stores and other warehouses in their territory. They also ran illegal casinos, again, in their territory. Unlike their biggest rivals, the Southside Gang, O'Banion 100% refused to allow gangs to traffic in sex.
Because prostitution's bad, bro.
Forcing women into prostitution or sex trade is bad, which is what a lot of the gangs did. Now, if you choose it to be in the sex trade, that's your own choice.
You never choose it consciously.
Very rarely.
Something had led you that
Yeah.
that's your last choice.
It's very rare.
First
I
choice,
mean,
I could be a prostitute or I'll be a lawyer. I'll go suck some dick.
there are definitely some women that decide to go into the sex trade. There are some women that choose to. I don't know why they do it, but to each their own, right? Some people would rather get paid to do that than they would to go to school and get a good career. And
There's a great documentary on Netflix called Tricked. And yeah, some of the girls talk about that it was their choice. This is what they felt that they could amount to, which
Yeah.
is what they could give.
yeah,
And obviously personal opinion, but if the best you think you can give is your body, I don't think you're raised right? I don't think that's your first choice personally. I can understand how they might see it as their first choice
Yeah.
if they don't know that their worth is more than that. But obviously the times that we're talking about now, back in the 1920s, 1930s, women...
It was different for
Yeah.
women then.
but also as long as it's their choice, it's different than if they were forced into it. And a lot of these women were trafficked, and that's the big difference, right? There was no choice for all these women that they're talking
And
about
I think
here.
in the 1920s, 1930s, we didn't have this women's movement, the hashtag, Me Too and all
Yeah.
of that, right? So if you weren't worthy of marriage and marrying into a husband who could take care of you and treat you,
Yeah.
if what you had was your downstairs and good looks, that's unfortunately what you used to get where you needed to be, or at least to survive at least.
Yeah.
Yeah. O'Banion also ran large campaigns like the best of them to get good publicity in the local neighborhoods, where they would give large donations to local orphanages and charities. They would also donate food to the poor and give loans to local poor and unemployed. So they kind of played it up like a lot of the drug lords in South America, right? They would not forget to foster their political connections either, and made sure to help the politicians they befriended with helping them commit election fraud.
We're going to help you by committing fraud.
Yeah. Oh.
Sorry. It's still coming. Hold on. And cut.
And start. O'Banion ended up romancing Viola Caniff and married her in 1921. This led to him purchasing a stake in the William Schofield's River North flower shop. This became the legal front for the gang, all because he was a fan of flowers, and he turned out to be a good arranger of them.
Everybody's good at something.
Yeah,
right?
it's true.
It's good to find your...
He's good at crime and flower arranging.
Killer florist.
Killer florist. There's probably some of those. The best part is that this became the florist to the mob funerals of the time.
Oh, man.
The rooms above the shop became the headquarters of the gang. With so many gangs running Chicago at the time, everyone wanted a piece of the alcohol game. For about 3 years, the Northside gang played nice and let other gangs have their own territories to keep the peace. O'Banion ended up being dissatisfied and worked out a new deal to get some rights to beer and a quarter of a casino outside of his own territory. Kind of shows his power, right? Yeah. But while doing this, he also talked speakeasies of the day to move into his territory, moving the sales of other gangs. This had the possibility of starting a bootleg war, and the Southsiders tried to stem the tide with proceeds from their brothels, but he flat out refused as he despised sex work. He even went as far as stealing shipments of beer from the Southsiders and selling it back to the original owners. This must have stung for the Southsiders.
Would he have sold it back at the same price and be like, and here's your 15% for getting back your own shit?
Mm-hmm.
Could be. Who knows? But even if they didn't, it's still free money, right?
It's not free. Well,
for him, it is free money.
Well, yeah, but if you take the risk about it, I'd definitely cash on a tiny bit on top of it.
These are fucking gangsters. They don't give a shit.
He would have been one, right?
Yeah. Now, O'Banion and his cohort, Weiss, were not bulletproof with the police and were arrested in 1922 on charges of burglary. But regardless, they had considerable protection from the Chicago Police Department. As an insult to law-abiding citizens, he even held a fancy banquet for local police and politicians in Chicago. This banquet's quote-unquote honorable guests included Chief Detective Michael Hughes, Police Lieutenant Charles Evans, County Clerk Robert Switzer, Public Works Commissioner Colonel Albert A. Spargu.
It's Colonel Mustard from the Clue game. That's how you got to start.
Sprague.
Asparagus.
Asparagus. There we go. Albert A. Asparagus, as well as many Democrat and Republicans. This feast was later investigated by the mayor, William E. Dever, and dubbed the Balazar Feast. I personally love and despise the story of a heist they pulled off in 1924. The Northside Gang, led by Police Lieutenant Michael Grady and 4 detective sergeants, robbed the Sibley Distillery. They ended up stealing 750 bottles of bonded whiskey, worth about $100,000 at the time.
Wow.
This is the police and the gang.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
This distillery had been padlocked at the beginning of Prohibition. All involved ended up being indicted for the theft, but the charges ended up being dismissed quickly. You know, having friends in all the right places.
In the right high places, yeah.
I got friends in low places, what?
No.
No low friends? Okay.
No, senor.
One of O'Banion's last insults to the Southsiders came on May 19th, 1924. Both the Northside Gang and the Southsiders had shares in a valuable Sebin brewery. O'Banion claimed he wanted out of the racket and asked to sell his portion of the brewery to the Southsider Gang. Their leader, Torrio, took the bait and paid them $500,000 in today's money, closer to $7 million.
Oh, dear.
The Sebin Brewery and Beer Garden may have been the biggest double cross in the Prohibition era, as O'Banion knew all along that the police were about to raid the property, and he was the only washing his hands of the place. This double cross signed O'Banion's death warrant, though. On November 10th, 3 men entered William Schofield's flower shop and shot him dead. This moment started a 5-year war that ended with St. Valentine's Day Massacre in 1929.
Torrio was the same guy from the Al Capone, right?
Yeah.
Who handed over.
He was the original leader of the Southsiders.
Crazy.
Yeah.
I love the crossover. It's great.
Yeah. Without giving away too many details of the actual story of the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, I'm going to just go over the next few leaders of the gang, finishing with the one in charge during the massacre. Next in line for the gang leadership was Henry Earl J.,
Bucheski,
better known as Jaime Weiss, and good God, can I understand why. The claim of fame for Jaime Weiss was that he was the only man that Al Capone feared. But let's start with some of his past first. Weiss was born in January 25th, 1898, in what is now Poland. Like the former boss of the gang, he was a Catholic, even if his name did not sound like it. He started his career in crime as a petty crook, even getting his nickname the Perfume Burglar, as he damaged a shelf of perfume in a botched burglary as a youth. But when he met his friends Dean O'Banion and George Bugs Morgan, they formed the Northside Gang. To give an idea of his personality, here's a bit from his brother. Wojcicki's brother, Fred, was questioned about him in 1926. He replied, "I've seen him once in 20 years. That was when he shot me 6 years ago."
Number one shot.
Oh
through
my
Nova
God.
Scotia.
Yeah.
When photographers tried to snap his picture, Wojcicki would glare at them and say in a low voice, "You take my picture and I kill you." Jaime Weiss only lasted as a gang leader for just over 2 years, but it is hard to survive during a turf war. Under Weiss, the gang did fight with the Southsiders run by Al Capone with multiple shootouts and casualties on both sides. Before Weiss was killed, he had driven the former boss of the Southsiders, or Chicago outfit, out of the USA and back to Italy, as well as having Al Capone, the current boss, on the run. He was killed on October 11th, 1926, at the young age of 28.
That's my age.
You young and you. It's hard to believe, though. Like 28, and he's already fucking dead as a crime lord. One of their hopeful allies had been murdered, and Weiss showed up with his bodyguard Sam Pellier, gangster Patty Murray, attorney William W. O'Brien, and Benjamin Jacobs, an investigator for O'Brien. After they headed back to their headquarters at the flower shop, at about 4 p.m., Weiss and the group from the court hopped in their cars and headed out along Superior Street and turned the corner onto State Street. When they came around the corner, 2 gunmen that had been hidden in a rooming house opened fire on their cars with a submachine gun and a shotgun. Weiss and Patty Murray were fatally wounded by the first round of the bullets, but did not initially fall to the ground. The lawyer, William O'Brien, was hit 4 times and stumbled off to a nearby stairwell. When Sam Peller first heard the gunshots, he drew his .38 and opened fire in the direction of the shooters. Unfortunately, one of his bullets struck Weiss and finished him off.
Shit.
Yeah, never good when you kill your own boss, right? Even though he was already going to die, it's never good.
Shit happens. You don't want to be the one that pulls the trigger, right?
Yeah. Sam Peller and Benjamin Jacobs had both been hit by bullets and stumbled their way back to where they came from. The bullets from the attack chipped a cornerstone at the Holy Name Cathedral across the street, and you can still see that today. For the next few months, the 2 gangs traded killings and bombings, but finally a peace conference was held. Once Weiss was killed, the gang leadership was shared by both Vincent Drucke and Bugs Morgan. But for the sake of the story, let's start with Vincent Drucke. Vincent Drucke was a Sicilian-American mobster born January 1st, 1898. What a traitor, huh? Sicilian? Like, he should be in the Italian mob.
You should be making pizzas. I don't even know what he's talking about. It's a Sicilian. It's a pepperoni.
What the fuck? He spent time serving in the U.S. Navy as a young man, but once he got back, he began his life of crime. He would spend his time breaking open payphones for their coin boxes. For our young listeners, we used to have to use payphones that were located around town before cell phones were a thing.
I absolutely despise that both of you fuckers looked at me. I know what a payphone is. How do you think Harry Potter got to fucking Magic Land? He stepped into a fucking phone booth.
No, he stepped into a brick wall inside the train station.
And a toilet one time. And in the...
I've never read the books. I've just watched the movies.
Why are you even talking?
No, he was only at the bench
toilets.
that last
And then
time.
one time there was a red phone booth.
The emergency night bus. He wasn't in a phone booth.
Oh, God.
I'm just going to Google this to prove you guys wrong. It's fine.
No, he was in the phone booth.
It's okay. We can cut this out. It's fine.
No,
Mama,
we're going to keep this. We're going to keep this. This is important.
I know my Harry Potter, okay?
This will get our younger listeners, right?
Thank you. Us 28-year-olds, we're so young.
Exactly.
Fuck me. I'm Googling Harry Potter phone.
It's just a little note for me. When I was a kid, I didn't even have internet at home until I was in high school.
Yeah.
I found it, guys. I speak the truth.
Go on. What's the truth?
The phone booth outside of King's Cross will connect you to... We're loading.
We're loading.
Oh, my phone's loading. No, it's a thing. 17 hidden gems Harry Potter fans should know. Beside Diagon Alley. There'll be a link to it. Brew Crime.
Okay. He then joined the Northside Gang, then run by O'Banion, where they ran former legally breweries and distilleries. He also helped in the shakedowns the gang pulled off and their local rackets. While this gang was mostly Irish, Druki was the start of the leadership that was not of Irish descent when Weiss was murdered. While leading a small gang, they had a lot of power, and not to be outdone, Druki was not only the boss, but he also acted as enforcer for the gang. He was involved with many violent incidents, as can be expected for a crime boss. One occasion, he was ambushed in a Capone-style drive-by shooting, and when he was not hit, he charged the shooters and tried to chase them in a car he hijacked.
That's super badass.
I agree. This is from Lawrence Bergreen in a book called Capone, the Man and the Era. Describes Druki. He had a streak of recklessness and daring, and he looked the part of a gangster, tough, dark, and menacing. His expression frozen in a tragic mask topped by wild and unkempt hair, and a face to haunt the dreams of the enemies. Druki was known as the schemer, and for good reason, it would seem. He would come up with ridiculous plans while drinking, but he did operate the gang with intimidation and extortion of legitimate businesses. He once had a husky woman he knew beat up a local female shop owner who would not pay for protection while he watched. I guess at least he didn't beat her up.
She was a husky woman.
I know, not my words. It was what was written down. He did have a joker side, though, as he would dress as a priest and walk down the street and make all kinds of indecent comments to couples as they walked by. Kind of sounds like fun.
I still feel like, am I a husky woman? Like, what would qualify as a husky? I shave. Like, I don't have hair. Is that a husky or is it just like the weight? And cut. Continue.
No.
My favorite caper he pulled off, though, was a doozy. On November 30th, 1926, at a Northside garage in Chicago, the gang, including Druki and Bugs Morgan, Frank Gusenberg, and Pete Gusenberg, entered while two police officers were seizing 50 cases of beer. They claimed to be federal agents, and Druki ordered the others to handcuff the police officers. While they were at it, they took the officers' guns. They did not even take the beer. They just left the officers handcuffed in the garage. It does seem odd, though, that they would do this, as the Chicago police, who used to back them, had already started to be more sympathetic to the Chicago Capone-run gang. Unfortunately for him, like most gangsters, his life did not last long, and neither did his reign as a crime lord. On April 4th, 1927, he was arrested, and found to be carrying a concealed .45 pistol. The police arrested him with his two associates. This next bit I have taken directly from Wikipedia. Druki objected to being held by the arm while they were waiting for the car, and insulted Healy, who responded with a slap. He then drew and brandished his gun and threatened to shoot Druki. In the car, the argument continued, but what happened next was a matter of dispute. Later, the policeman who had been present during the incident supported Healy's version of events, that Druki, while announcing his intention, had lunged for Healy's gun, but Healy had drawn back, then shot Druki. Druki's two associates gave a different account, asserting that a scuffle started after Healy punched Druki, causing the driver to halt the car at the roadside, whereupon Healy had got out on the running board and had drawn and fired on Druki, who was shot while sitting in the car, handcuffed with his hands in his lap. Hit in the arm, leg, and abdomen, Druki collapsed, dying on the floor of the car. He was only 29 years old at the time of his death. Again, a fucking baby, right?
Yeah. Child's play.
As a note, he is the only American crime boss ever to be killed by a police officer.
Ever.
Is that amazing?
Yeah.
You'd think with all of the crime bosses and all the friggin' wars out there, more of them would be killed by police officers.
Is that on U.S. territory?
In general, period.
Wasn't Pablo killed by a U.S. dude?
He's not an American, though. He was not an American crime lord.
Yeah.
So now we get into Bugs Morgan. Adelard Cunnin, better known as George Bugs Morgan, I don't know why, was born on August 21st, 1893, in St. Paul, Minnesota. His parents, Jules and Marie Cunnin, immigrated to the U.S. from France. While going to a private Catholic high school in St. Paul, he joined a local gang. Big surprise.
Yeah.
He quit school at 18 and was caught robbing a local store. This was the first time he was put in jail in his life, although this time it was only juvenile correctional facility. He ended up in prison 3 times before his 21st birthday. How many times have you been to jail?
0.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's because I'm 28 and he's 29, so he has...
This is 21st birthday, though.
Oh, fuck.
He was able to escape from his facility, though, and fled to Chicago. But he was arrested there while trying to rob a warehouse as part of a horse stealing ring. 1890s, right? What the hell?
That's how the Pony Express actually started. Gangsters stealing ponies.
He was also involved with a robbery where a police officer was killed and the robbery of a freight car. This led to a few stints in prison. Duh. At some point, he ended up with the Northside Gang dealing in alcohol, bootlegging, and the like. Much like his former boss, Morgan was disgusted with Al Capone that he would deal with prostitution all because of his Catholic faith. Fucking hypocrite. Gotta love the hypocrisy in this, as he would be involved with all kinds of illegal and immoral acts. But he drew the line at prostitution. But then again, this is the hypocrisy of so many religions. Under Morgan, Capone's beer shipments were regularly hijacked, and they even burnt down the dog track owned by Capone after he burned down the one that was owned by Morgan. Why not burn them all down, right?
Burn it all.
Bugs Morgan was the gangster in charge when the St. Valentine's Day Massacre took place. While he did live through the massacre, he did quit the gang sometime after Prohibition ended in 1930. He never left the life of crime, though, and kept up his petty crime to the end. On April 30th, 1939, he was convicted of conspiracy to make and cash $62,000 worth of American Express checks. Remember American Express checks?
No. Not back in my day.
Back in my day.
Yeah, Tamagotchis.
Oh my god.
Pogs.
Oh, I love Pogs. I had the shiny Pogs.
He was freed on bond during an appeal, but fled before the retrial. He was captured again years later on December 21st, 1944. He was free from 39 to 44. By the 40s, only 17 years after he was one of the richest gangsters in Chicago, he was almost penniless. He was in and out of prison for the rest of his life and died only a few months into a 10-year sentence at Leavenworth Prison in Kansas from lung cancer on February 25th, 1957, at the age of 63. The way the leadership of the gang went with the Northside Gang, I would say that he was kind of lucky, because everyone else died in their late 20s. All right, well, that's the end of my background of the Northside Gang. All right. Let's get into the finale of this episode, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. Dun, dun, dun. Can you give us a little hint of what's going to be on this story?
It's February 14th, 1929. People are buying last-minute gifts for their significant others, maybe receiving flowers from secret admirers, or maybe, just maybe, dying in a hail of gunfire.
Bra, bra, bra.
This episode is called The St. Valentine's Day Massacre. Well, at least I don't have to buy a gift now.
Because everyone I love is dead.
There's upsides to everything, isn't there?
Mm-hmm. So the beer that we're pouring for this one is called Turf War. Mike's going to tell you all about it.
It's a modern IPA from Bridge Brewing Company. It says it's not an East Coast IPA, not a West Coast IPA. This beer is soft and juicy, with an assertive bitterness and a delectable finish. Beer is for drinking, not defining. So get to it. All right, so it's got kind of a cloudy, kind of golden straw color with a white head.
It's nice. I like citrusy, almost.
It's got citrusy. It's got a floral hop aroma. It's kind of grassy.
Sure.
Yeah, it's got lots of citrus and kind of pithy and rindiness. It is quite juicy. It's got lots of fruit in it, with that grassiness and herbalness of the hops in the background, with a hint of grain. The bitterness isn't high, but it's there. That's just a nice beer. I've never had this one from Bridge, and I'm a fan of Bridge. I like what they do, and I'll have this again.
Yeah, I don't mind it at all. Actually, it tastes pretty yummy. And I'm a bit of a sucker for design in a bottle, and I love that their barcode on the actual bottle is based after a bridge.
Looks like the Lionsgate Bridge is what it is.
Sure.
It's
unique.
Stanley
still.
Park, the Lionsgate Bridge. I actually love, for me, they have a flavor wheel kind of thing, and they mention the hops, the color, and the malt with the stanchions of the bridge. And the amount of color on that stanchion is how much hops there are, how much color there is, and how much the malt there is. See that, Nina?
That's a lot of planning.
It's got a lot of hop aroma and flavor, right? So it's high on that. The color is low, so it's lower on the stanchions. And the malts, it's a fairly pale malt.
Yeah, no,
So
I actually like it, and considering my palate is not worthy, I like it. I'll have
quite
some more.
basic. Have a little more then.
That's a little more.
Let us know what the Massacre is all about.
It was a chilly February morning in Chicago. Years of turmoil and conflict between two violent gangs was about to come to a head. On one side was the North Side Gang, an Irish gang led by Bugs Marone. On the other side was the South Side Gang, Italians, led by Al Capone. Clearly no one put any effort into gang names then. These gangs had been killing, beating, and or sabotaging members of the opposing gang to gain dominance over the bootleg business that was thriving in Prohibition-era Chicago. While they had many other side games going on, gambling, prostitution, drugs, whatever it was, depending on the gang. The alcohol was really the thing to be going for then in Prohibition area, because who doesn't want booze?
Yeah. Don't be telling people my gang had prostitution.
Yeah. I said or.
Yeah, that's true.
So this had been going on for years, but by 1929, Al Capone had enough. So he had someone call Bugs Marone and tell him about a shipment of Canadian whiskey. They were to meet at a garage located at 2122 North Clark Street. This was one of Marone's usual locations, so this call wasn't really out of the ordinary for him. Marone was to meet his men there at 10:30 a.m. February 14th to go pick up the shipment in Detroit. Those men were Frank and Peter Gusenberg, the drivers / muscle, James Clark, born Albert Kacheluk, Moran's brother-in-law / muscle / second in command, Adam Hayer, the owner of the garage and the friend / business manager of Moran. A few there were likely not involved with this specific smuggling plan. Johnny May, ex-safecracker turned auto mechanic, was just working at the garage that day with his German Shepherd Highball.
Vodka Cran.
Neither can get behind that dog.
Yeah, dogs.
Highball?
Oh, I should name my next pet that. And this is Highball. He's a vodka cran, not a vodka soda. Mm-hmm. Get it right, get it tight.
Reinhard Schrimmer, an optometrist that became friends with Moran and hung around for the thrill of being around gangsters. Loser. Al Weinshank, who was a club owner, business owner, and I couldn't really find out why he was there, or like that specific day. I didn't know why he was there, but it is important to note that he looked and dressed just like Moran. Like just
Yeah.
It was kind of the style. He wasn't specifically trying to look like him, but it was just how he dressed. So Moran was running late on his way to the garage and saw an unmarked police car pull up outside. To avoid what he thought was going to be a shakedown, he continued on down the street to a coffee shop. He encountered Henry Gusenberg, who was also on his way to the garage. Moran advised Henry to just go home. Another Northside gang member, Willie Marks, which is like the worst fucking name.
Really? Because the other guys were called Crackers. I don't fucking know.
Willie, though? Willie Marks?
Big Willie style.
That's
I'd rather be
horrible.
known as being a big Willie than being a fucking cracker.
I guess. Anyway, he saw the police car on his way to the garage, noted the license plate, and avoided the garage like the plague. So Capone's men saw Al Weinshank enter the garage. They thought that he was Bugs Marone, and they put their plan into action. 5 men got out of the car. 2 were in police uniforms, and 3 were in civilian clothing. They burst into the garage and told the 7 men that were inside to line up facing the wall. They begrudgingly listened, also falsely assuming that they were about to be arrested. Thompson submachine guns. One of them had a 20-round box magazine and the other had a 50-round drum.
Holy shit.
I barely
Bra-bra-bra-bra.
I barely know what this means, but I think you all get the idea. It was a lot of fucking bullets. They sprayed their victims even after they had collapsed to the ground.
I think, as I said before in the the workplace crimes, I respect someone who finishes. fucking shoot them when they're down. You never know when they're dead.
Oh, wait,
Prep, prep, prep.
but you're assuming
But
that
wait.
they used the submachine guns after they'd collapsed to the ground. So they
I
weren't
never
done.
assume.
John May and James Clark were then shot in the face with shotguns,
Yowzer.
which nearly obliterated their faces.
Fun.
They finish the job. And there's your face on my tie and on the wall.
Yeah.
So Mike just held up a beer cap that had a tie on it
Yes.
because it ties so well into the story.
Haha, ties so well.
So funny.
Witnesses later stated that they heard the gunshots, but then they saw two policemen leading civilians out at gunpoint and assumed it was being handled. As it turns out, those civilians had just committed murder with those police officers.
Oh, you gotta love collaboration.
Yeah, but what matters most here is that the dog Highball was not shot.
Good to hear.
So Highball continued to bark until the landlady from next door, Jeanette Lanesman, got fed up and asked one of her boarders to go have a look and see what the problem was. So C.L. McAllister went to check on the dog, but instead found 7 bodies and blood everywhere. He immediately ran back and asked her to call the police. The police arrived, the non-sketchy ones this time, to find that Frank Gusenberg was still alive. He was rushed to the hospital where police repeatedly asked who had shot him. In spite of having 14 bullet wounds, all he would say was, "Nobody shot me." This guy took snitches get stitches to the next fucking level.
Nice.
I am sure that he went on to the Valhalla of gangsters.
Valhalla.
Good place to be.
This couldn't have felt like a win for Capone, though. He didn't get the big fish. Marone wasn't even in the building at the time. This act of vengeance only turned up the heat for Capone. Even the public that had previously turned a blind eye knew that this was one step too far. They turned on him, and the law was definitely on board with that. There were more than enough suspects. To narrow down the search, the investigators started with those who could have been hired by Capone. This was the logical start since Marone and Capone's turf war was at its peak at that time. Detroit's Purple Gang was...
It's her favorite color.
I know, right. It's the best color. Anyway,
I disagree.
well... It's okay
We'll fight
to
about
be
it later.
wrong. So Marone had been hijacking Capone's liquor shipments from Detroit's Purple Gang. So they were a natural choice for Capone to hire for this particular job. George Lewis, Eddie Fletcher, Phil Keywell, and his younger brother Harry Keywell were identified by landladies Mrs. Duty. Right?
Mrs. Duty. What a shitty name.
The fucking worst,
Yeah.
right?
I mean, that's just crap.
And the other landlady's name was Mrs. Orvidson. They ran a rooming house across the street from the garage and had let rooms to the men only 10 days before the shooting. Later in the investigation, they were less sure about their identifications. The Chicago police questioned and cleared George Lewis, Eddie Fletcher, and Harry Keywell. In spite of that, the Keywell brothers and the Purple Gang as a whole remained a part of the massacre case. Inevitably, really,
Yeah.
because it was never really fucking solved. So some believed that all of them involved in the murder were real police officers, out for their own kind of justice against the Northside Gang for the murder of a police officer's son. This seems unlikely, though, as the following group of suspects explains the police uniforms quite easily. The unmarked police car was actually involved in a bit of a fender bender en route to the massacre that day. The driver of the other vehicle, Elmer Lewis, stopped immediately but was waved on by the driver who was wearing a police uniform and missing a front tooth. This was corroborated by a witness, H. Wallace Caldwell. It is very likely that the two supposed policemen in the car were Fred, killer, Burke, a former member of the Egan's Rats, and his partner, James Ray. They could have been the two men that were dressed as police officers. They were career criminals that frequently wore police uniforms while robbing banks, and Fred Burke was missing a front tooth. Fred was already a fugitive from justice. He was under indictment for robbery and murder in Ohio. What the police really needed was more evidence. And by more evidence, I mean any physical evidence at all. Luckily for them, they only had to wait a week.
Why wait for real evidence when you can fake it?
Fake it till you make it, really.
A garage fire on Wood Street was reported on February 22nd. When the police arrived, they found a disassembled 1927 Cadillac partially burned. This was the same model spotted at the massacre. They tracked it back to the dealer. He had sold the car to James Morton from L.A. This was a man they had no luck finding. It was as if he didn't exist. Ooh, like a fucking ghost. So they turned their focus onto the garage. It had been rented to Frank Rogers of 1859 West North Avenue. That was an address of a cafe owned by Claude Maddox. Claude was a former St. Louis gangster with ties to the Purple Gang and to Egan's Rats. What a fucking coincidence.
Yeah.
Investigators had no luck finding Frank Rogers either. Eventually, police moved on to Capone gunman Albert Anselmi?
Anselmi, maybe?
These are a lot of names that I'm
Ensemble.
going to guess, so whatever. Police moved on to Capone gunman Albert Selmy, John Scalise, Jack McGurn, and Capone bodyguard Frank Rio. Charges were brought against McGurn and Scalise for the massacre. Unfortunately, Capone beat them to the punch. In May of 1929, before the case really began, Capone murdered Scalise and Anselmi, as well as Joseph Hoptoad Gionte, after learning of their plot to do the same to him.
What an asshole fucker.
How do all of those last fucking nicknames suck ass? Like Scarface, and you get George Pantalone. Like
The Toad. What?
the Toad.
Yeah, I mean, Hoptoad is... Where do you... I don't know where that
I don't know.
comes from.
Hoptoad sounds like a good beer name, but that's about it.
And
Yeah.
it tastes like a beer I wouldn't like.
I don't know. You like this one, the Turf War, and it's an IPA, which would be a Hoptoad.
I
basically.
tolerated. Let's get on board here.
Most of the charges against McGurn had been dropped due to lack of evidence. He was still charged under the Mann Act for taking his girlfriend, Louise Rolfe, across state lines. You guys are going to love this part, actually. So the short form of the Mann Act is that you can't transport people across state lines for immoral purposes. So
Yeah.
since these two were traveling with each other across state lines, they went to Florida.
Yeah. That's a ways from
Don't
Chicago.
go to Florida.
No. Disney World is amazing.
Okay. But
Orlando's great. Just skip the rest of the state.
they traveled across state lines to go to Florida because they were going to Florida to get married.
Oh, yeah.
But because they were not married when they crossed state lines, they were both convicted under the Mann Act.
Hey, if you got to catch some douchebags somehow, you're going to get them any way you can.
So he received 2 years of imprisonment, and she received 4 years.
Oh,
Or,
sexism.
Sorry, 4 months.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Well,
Still
wage gap,
sexism.
wage gap. Let's just multiply it by whatever and divide it by whatever, and it's fair game.
yeah.
Yeah. It's called the Mann Act.
Yeah.
And the other name for this law is the White Slavery Act.
Which I saw,
Yeah.
and it disgusted me.
Yeah. It's basically a completely bullshit law to prevent white people from dating or marrying black people.
Is that what it was? Okay, I thought it was a law that came in for the sex trade, but okay, that's even weirder.
That's what they claimed it was, but
okay.
really legally they only ever applied it to, like, if you lived in the South and you were trying to go to a state where it was legal for white people to marry black people.
Yeah.
You could be arrested for leaving the state because of white slavery.
Wow.
And it was just a total load of horse shit. Anyway,
That's
it was a
nuts.
bullshit law that they only ever used in cases like this so that they could charge someone with something when nothing was really done. Because these two had been living together for years, and all they did was go to a different state. So he received 2 years in prison and she received 4 months. So Louise had also provided McGurn with an alibi. And so from then on, her nickname was the Blonde Alibi. Because it was his alibi for the massacre. Mm-hmm. Was that she was like, no, he wasn't there. He was with me.
And she's blonde, so it's
And she's blonde. And she was an actress at the time. She's very pretty, actually.
Nice. Not surprising, truthfully.
Yeah.
Just in general, gangsters and people that aren't law-binding seem to have the most beautiful partners.
Yeah.
In general.
Gangsters and athletes.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, what I said, basically.
Oh, yeah. Good point.
How many of them are actually breaking the law with doping and stuff?
Yeah. Okay, so with no viable, unalibied suspects, the case ground to a halt until December 13th, 1929. The aforementioned Fred Burke was out drinking and made the asshat decision to drive home because drunken driving is wrong, and this is what fucking happens when you decide to be a fucking idiot. He rear-ended another vehicle and quickly sped off. Patrolman Charles Skelly chased him and eventually forced him off the road. The patrolman got out of his car, and as he jumped onto the running board of Burke's car, he was shot 3 times. He died later that night. He was only 25 years old.
Wow.
So old.
Yeah.
Old soul.
The car was found wrecked and abandoned outside of St. Joseph, Michigan. The car was traced back to a Frederick Dane. The Berrien County Sheriff's Department raided Dane's bungalow the next day and quickly realized that Dane and Burke were one and the same. The bungalow was a bit of a gold mine for the Sheriff's Department. They found a trunk with a bulletproof vest, almost $320,000 in bonds, recently sold from a Wisconsin bank, and that's about $4,699,000 US dollars today.
Woohoo! I won some of that.
I know, or $6,212,000 Canadian dollars.
I want more of that.
Holy shit, right?
So that's 6 houses.
Fuck. They also found 2 Thompson submachine guns, pistols, 2 shotguns, and thousands of rounds of ammunition. The local authorities immediately notified the Chicago police. The machine guns were brought to Chicago for forensic ballistics testing. I didn't even realize that the ballistics testing was around then.
Yeah.
In like the 1920s, 1930s. I had no idea that ballistics testing was even a thing then. That's pretty cool. I mean, obviously it was in its infancy at that time, but it was still in use. And I tried to look up the history of it, and actually the first mention of it was in 1531.
Holy fuck.
Which I had no idea. Anyway, the guns were confirmed to be the same ones used in the massacre, and one of them was also connected to the murder of New York mobster Frankie Yale, which had occurred about 1.5 years earlier. But where was Burke? No one knew, and the case went cold again. He was eventually found and arrested on a farm in Missouri a year later. As there was no further physical evidence found in the massacre case, officials decided to just charge Burke with the murder of Patrolman Skelly. Burke was tried in Michigan and sentenced to life imprisonment. He died in prison in 1940.
That's lucky for him. I mean, most of these gangsters died really fucking young.
Yeah, and violently.
Oh, hell yeah, they did.
Mm-hmm. So later, in 1935, a fairly different version of events came out when Byron Bolton was taken into custody. So he was an associate of Egan's Rats and was one of the lookout men the day of the massacre. He claimed that the hit was actually planned October or November of 1928. Fred Gertz, Al Capone, Frank Nitti, Fred Burke, Gus Winkler, and Louis Campagna, Daniel Ceratelli, and William Pacelli, and obviously Bolton himself, were all enjoying hunting, fishing, and planning the murder of their enemies at a resort in Wisconsin that Gates owned. The plan was that Bolton and Jimmy Moran, no relation, were to watch the garage and signal the killers at the Circus Cafe when Bugs Moran arrived. Bolton thought that the actual killers that day were Burke, Winkler, Gitz, Bob Carey, Raymond Craneneck, which is the worst fucking name. Like, you may as well be called Bookworm or something. It's not badass at all. And Claude Maddox, 4 shooters and 2 getaway drivers. When Bolton saw Al Wineshank, he mistook him for Moran and called the Circus Cafe to signal that it was time to go. The killers entered expecting to kill Moran and 2 or 3 others. When they found 7 men there, they quickly decided that they just had to kill everyone and get out. Capone was furious for this mistaken identity and the resulting pressure from police. He planned on killing Bolton for his mistake, but Fred Goetz talked him out of it. This version of events was corroborated by Winkler's widow, Georgette. She claimed that her husband was part of a group of men that Capone used for high-risk jobs, and that he referred to them as the American Boys. A Chicago detective named William Drury, who had stayed on the case well after everyone else had given up, also corroborated Bolton's story. In spite of this information, no action was taken by the FBI. By 1935, there was almost no one left to charge, so what was the fucking point? All of the men mentioned were dead except Burke and Maddox. The submachine guns are still in the possession of the Barron County Sheriff's Department in St. Joseph, Michigan.
I want that gun, and I don't even like guns.
The garage was demolished in 1967 and later became a parking lot for the neighboring nursing home. The bricks of the wall that the men were lined up against were purchased by a Canadian businessman.
Oh, cool.
He displayed them in various crime-related displays.
Shit.
He sold some of them off individually, and the remainder are now owned by the Mom Museum in Las Vegas, where they have reassembled them so you can actually stand in front of the wall and get your picture taken. You can see the bullet holes, blood stains, everything. It's still there. So people passing by and neighbors of the former location of the garage sometimes hear the sounds of machine guns and men screaming at night. That's it. That's the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. Ghosts and all.
That's a great one. Mm-hmm. All right, let's move this on. Let's finish it off with a little bit of this. All right. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd love if you would check us out on any podcast app. Check us out on our host, Spreaker.com. You can email us at brewcrime@pacificbeerchat.com. You can find us on brewcrime.com. You can find us at facebook.com/group/brewcrime. So thanks for listening. Hope you'll come back in the next couple of weeks. Mm-hmm. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.
Seeing as this is a Valentine's Day episode, I thought I'd read some of the reviews we've got recently from some of our fans. First one, the title is Great Host, Good Brew, and True Crime. It's a 5-star review, and it says, the perfect storm for the perfect podcast. Mike and Beck always bring their best to each episode. Every case is researched and well thought out. The hosts are very likable, even though they do talk funny. They're Canadian. We love them. Give them a listen. You will be hooked, no question. Jen, our True Crime podcast, and big shout out to them. Really enjoy our True Crime podcast. Another review we got is titled Genius. It's another 5-star review. Have you ever wondered if crime could be presented in a way that isn't overdramatic, overemphasized? Well, boy, do Beck and Mike have you covered. Not only do they assimilate all the facts for your eardrums, they put it on their gosh darn website too. Next time you get in a casual conversation about crime, I promise you'll have the upper hand. Stop reading my review and start listening. Thanks to both of you. We love the reviews, and if you can leave us a review, we'll read it on the show. Thanks a lot. I'd also like to give a little shout out as a little Valentine's shout out to Booze and Brews podcast, one of my favorite podcasts right now. If you're into ghost stories and you're into some good laughs, these two ladies and their engineer, they're always making me chuckle. They bring me to tears sometimes when I'm in my car. It's so funny. So if you're looking for something new, check out Booze and Brews. Cheers. Brew Crime's intro was created by Mike using Creative Commons Attribution licensed audio from purple-planet.com, soundbible.com, and freesoundeffects.com. Logo design was by Ben Greenberg. All cases and stories were written by Beck, Nina, and Mike, and our sources are put into the show notes for each episode. We always want to give credit to the people that research the cases we talk about. Check out our store at brewcrime.threadless.com, where you can purchase swag like t-shirts, phone cases, beach towels, and all kinds of cool stuff. We can also be found on your favorite podcast apps, our hosts, Spreaker.com or BrewCrime.com, as well as at BrewCrime on Twitter, at BrewCrime on Facebook, at Facebook.com/groups/BrewCrime. Thanks for listening. This has been a production of Pacific Beer Chat. Brew Crime is part of the Hopped Up Network. Here is a sample of one of the podcasts you can check out by going to hoppedupnetwork.com.
Hey, this is The Voice. I'm here interrupting one of your favorite podcasts to tell you all about mine. If you're a fan of craft beer, independent music, pop culture, and laughing at inappropriate things, then you should check out Drunken Lullabies, brought to you by Distilled Brewery. New episodes are available on draft every Sunday, so you can spend the Sabbath getting tipsy along with us. We try beers, play songs, and laugh our asses off. So go on, indulge yourself, and become a part of Drunkamaniac Nation. And if craft beer and music aren't your thing, you can listen to Drunk at the Movies every Wednesday, brought to you by Iron Spike Brewing Company. Listen to me and my friends provide our own alcohol-fueled commentary tracks to some of our favorite movies, unedited and uncensored. You don't have to be drunk to enjoy these movies, but it doesn't hurt. Until next time, this is The Voice saying, may your music be loud, and may your beers be cold.
Now here is a promo from a fellow true crime or spooky podcast that we really enjoy. Hope you'll take a listen.
This is Justin from Obscura, a true crime podcast. Do you like single-host, narrative-driven true crime that isn't afraid to get graphic? On Obscura, we paint a picture of the lives of the criminals and victims before telling a story of the crime and how it unfolded. Add atmospheric production and audio clips such as 911 calls, and you have an idea of what we're about. If that intrigues you, type Obscura True Crime into your favorite podcatcher. You can't miss our logo. And we'll see you by the fire.
When Capone bang, bang. Toria was running a number of gambling operations near Capone's home when Capone banged.
Hootie bang.
Chitty bang bang. Okay, let's do this again. From there, he began living a luxurious and public lifestyle. Newspapers of the time estimated.
Estimation.
Hello, it's me. Okay. Fuck. What's the fuck? No.
Fuck.
So instead, they raided Capone's business, where they gathered. Bless you. He suffered a bless you. He suffered a.
All right, so I'm gonna talk about.
I'm sorry. That's just who I am as a person. Fucking get to go. Let's get her.
Get her done.
Hoorah.
Sorry.
Dab. That's what Mike just did. Took off. Dab.
Okay, if I did that, okay. Gangs that were shit. The Market Street Gang really made for a name for them.
Wow.
Okay.
It'd be a crime if we weren't drunk.
Okay.
Your turn. I'll be here all day for another few hours.
O'Banion was mentored by the safecracker Charlie the Ops.
A cracker. I'm such a child. It's totally fair.
Now, almost no one would have gangsters, and they switched sides to the Chicago.
This is called
Midnight Train.
Midnight Train, yes.
Took the midnight train home, going anywhere. Do. Okay.
Wow.
That's the sound of quality right there, bros. And
Or
girls.
Rodcat. Public Works Commissioner.
Switcher.
Fucking names.
No, it's from when that beer exploded earlier, just like jizzed on my mic.
Yeah.
I'm just fucking with you anyways. Henry Earl J. Wardrisky. Okay, let's give you a chance with this name.
Can I read it?
Okay, I'll read it out and then I'll show you. Wojciechowski.
Oh, I got this. Wojciechowski.
Okay, Wojciechowski. Okay.
It's a Serb. You're welcome. Wojciechowski.
He isn't, but okay.
Sure, they're both located in Europe area.
Yes.
Yes, very nice.
Yes, very nice.
Oh, we're walking in the castle. Continue. Wow.
The number 2 prostitute.
My wife. This is the number 2
No,
prostitute.
sister.
This is my sister. Number 3 prostitute. Oh, 2 is it 3?
Number 2.
Number 2 prostitute of Kazakhstan.
Nice.
Wow, you are king in the castle. What is this? This is a nice dog. It's a tortoise, sir. Pamela Anderson. Okay, and I'm done. Cut.
Okay.
Go back.
Like the former boss of the gang, he was a Catholic, even though his day...
Even though his day was ruined because of the stars.
Yes. To give an idea of his personality, here is a bit of his brother.
Here's a bit of his brother. He was a very nice brother.
Very
he was the
nice,
number
yes.
3 brother in all of Kazakhstan. Or Poland, whatever.
Yes. To give
Very
an idea...
nice. I can't get rid of the Borat voice. Now that we did it, it's there forever.
I wrote 1993.
What?
I don't think he was born in 1993. I don't.
He's my age. I was born in 1990, but
His parents, Jules and Marie Deanna. Oh, fuck, I'm hyphenating her name, or I'm shortening her name. Her name's too long. But then again, this is the hypocrisy of so many religions.
Wow.
Let's do that.
that was deep.
I can read,
You can read real good.
especially today, better than normal.
Real good.
Well, he lived through the massacre. He did not quit the...
He did not quit.
Did not quit.
He did not try.
He was convicted of conspiracy...
These gang
Gang.
turned auto mechanic was just working at the garage that
X-safe cracker. I can't get over that.
cracker.
I'm so white.
Motherfucking cracker.
I relate to it so hard. I fucking feel it like crack-a-lackin'. Cal, stop.
Johnny May, ex-safe cracker.
Hey! Congratulations.
I just wanted to point out, you mentioned...
That was a sneeze.
No worries.